Well, good morning and welcome. It's great to see so many faces and indeed so many familiar faces. It's the 33rd Science Festival and I recognise a number of people who were at the 1st, the 10th, the 20th and 30th, and you're all warmly welcome. We're living in a critical time, a time of crisis globally and locally, with challenges, huge challenges, economic challenges, and of course the challenge of the planet. I was reflecting this morning that Orkney has had massive challenges before. For instance, in the 17th century, a time of extremely harsh climate, little resources, and yet a time when people in Orkney rose to the challenge. They set off to Hudson's Bay, they set off to the Arctic for whaling, they set off to the Antarctic. They took every opportunity to go out on the tall ships that called in at ports like Kirkwood and Stromness from just about every ocean in the world. And indeed, thinking about the oceans and about resilience and the ability of people to tackle huge challenges, the two speakers today are a glowing example. I was just thinking back that after the war it was a time of economic stagnation in Orkney. People emigrated, and then gradually as the oil came, all kinds of exciting developments came in its wake. One of them was the setting up of Heriot-Watt University's International Centre for Iron Technology in Stromness, and one of our speakers, Gareth Davies, was the co-founder of that, along with another good friend of the festival, Dr. John Sy. And then it was at that conference that Gareth organised that our second speaker became in contact with Orkney, and Neil Kermode came to that conference. Well, in the years since, Gareth has moved from ICIP to set up a consultancy, Aquatera, that deal all over the world and give opportunities to all kinds of talented people. Neil, 20 years ago, set up EMEC, the European Marine Energy Centre, and it's now become a world beacon in testing waves and tidal power. But not only that, moving on to find solutions for surplus renewable energy in exciting developments in hydrogen. Well, I've gone 20 years and more into the past. Neil and Gareth are now going to look ahead with their characteristic vision 20 years in the future. Welcome indeed to you both.
So, good morning everybody. So, yeah, Neil Kermode. I did actually set up EMEC, I think, a year or so after it started, but it is actually true that I came with a couple of Gareth organised for this team back in 2002 and 2003. It's the second one I came to, so I regard him as my mentor, and a lot of this is all his fault. We're going to do a bit of a double act on this as we go, and really I've also welcomed people that are online, so you never know where these thoughts end up permeating, so you've got to be really careful, see where they go. The talk today is really about moving into clean water. This is really about the potential that we have, that we can see, as we've got around in the county. As Howie mentioned, this is about the opportunities that we can see presenting themselves. And the point about an innovation journey is, as you go on a journey, other corridors and avenues start to open up. And this is very much about sort of a bit of a progress report on the other things that we can see that are coming and some of the things that have gone on. It is very much a horizon scan, and it's about personal view. So I'm not actually speaking on behalf of EMEC. I'm still on this. Is this radical? I'm not speaking on behalf of EMEC, it's a very personal views, and it's really about the several points about Orkney very much as a microcosm of what we see the rest of the world is going to be facing. Very much about the fact that we've got a strategic opportunity here, and we can see Orkney could play a full part of that. And very much about Orkney's early adopters technology, and also about how we need to integrate with the wider transition that needs to go on. And finally, it's about our unique ecosystem. Yeah, talk more about the opportunities that are already presented by Orkney as a whole. So, Gareth, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil, and fantastic pleasure. Thank you, Howie, for the introduction, so I won't go into any of that. But yeah, a particular pleasure to be back at the Science Festival, which I think is an intellectual highlight of the year for all of us that have the pleasure of being here. So, as Harry referred to, there is a crisis going on at the moment, and it's sometimes difficult to grasp the scale of that crisis, but there's 4 slides here that maybe picture some of the key things that are going on. So the first on the top left is around the atmospheric concentration of CO2, and I remember a very prosaic presentation that Neil gave a few years ago where he said 410, what's that mean to anybody? And I don't think maybe one person I think put a hand up and said it's the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. In the last few years that's gone up to 419. So it's an ever increasing trend. But as well as the atmospheric concentrations of CO2, we've seen a bit more of a step change in terms of ocean temperature. And some of you may have seen this graph on the BBC on the top right, which shows a dramatic change this year in average ocean warming and the temperature of the oceans. And in fact, the scientists didn't predict it, and we don't really know where that's going to take us because we don't know what happens next year. Is it another step change, or does it come back down? So that's something to watch. If we come back down then below this one, this map, some of you may be familiar with it, some not, but it's basically a map of the underlying ocean circulation that drives a lot of the climate and certainly drives a lot of the conditions in the seas of the world. And the red areas are the warm currents and the blue lines are the cold currents. And Orkney is positioned very close to an area where a lot of that dynamics is created here off Svalbard on the edge of the Arctic Circle. As that Arctic ice melts and cools the water, then and air is used, or in the summer cools, an air transfer of heat happens and it drives cold water down, and that becomes a pump that then literally circulates all the way around the Earth. And so the Gulf Stream that many of us have grown up with and thought it comes from the Caribbean towards us, the origins of the Gulf Stream are actually up in the Arctic where that water's pushing down. And one of the things that we may feel in the future, we're not feeling it this year, is that Orkney's climate could end up more like Labrador's if that pump stops. So we've got a really interesting dynamic to think about there. So given this amount of jeopardy, you would hope that we would have political leadership that would be consistent and give us a clear pathway to a low carbon future. But of course, we have anything but that at the moment. And I think all of us, it's got to the stage where it's not a political factor, it's a survival factor. We need to speak up, we need to demand more from our leaders at all levels, and we'll talk about that going forward. And when we think about our opinion, very often I think many people say, well, look, what can little Orkney do? Is it not for China and India and these other places to do that? And we found these statistics around Chinese public opinion, and actually the Chinese people do believe they should be doing something about it. If you look at any of the statistics, China's leading the world in terms of adopting clean technology alongside the growth that they have in their traditional industries. What we are still unsure about is probably what we think as Orcadians. We don't have a measure of our opinion. We have events like this where probably we're speaking to like-minded people to a large extent. But maybe that's something that we need to think about. Should we have a regular measure of our attitude through some public opinion process of our attitude to climate change? And the reason that that might be important to Orkney is that we're already a key energy hub. As Harry alluded to, and I guess Neil and I are testimony to it, and the teams that we work with and the many other organisations that are here in Orkney, over the last 20, 30 and even going back 50, 60 years, there's been this plethora of technology developments that's taken place. And around Orkney, there's also this plethora of resources. In the old days, if you like, the oil and gas resources, now moving towards offshore wind and marine energy resources. And so over the last decades, we've gone through a sequence of activities that have taken us from a major energy hub for oil and gas and then gradually transformed that role into a much wider spectrum. And now, as you'll see, there's the prospect of Flotta having a new heyday, but as an alternative clean fuel base alongside many other activities that are going on. And the scale of those activities is absolutely huge, and that's one of the things we want to talk to you about today and maybe have a little bit of discussion about the consequences of that.
So really, I want to talk to you a bit about how we see Orkney as being something of the rest of the world is going to face in the future. The Orkney is very much a case that we've got an energy system which is being dominated by renewables, and that's the way the rest of the world is going. The graph on the top right-hand corner shows the UK electricity supply as for a couple of years ago. The grey line being the demand over a month, and that has a little tooth-like shape, each tooth being a day. And the bottom is what was going on with renewables at the time. And the green jaggedness is actually due to solar, and the waviness in the green is due to the underlying wind that was going on. And we did some work a few years ago. It's a company based here, SMS, who did some work, and they looked at, so, well, what happens if you just put more renewables on the network? You just quadruple the amount of renewables, and we end up with that. Okay? But Orkney is like that today. And this is mounted off SSE's side. And the blue line shows the electricity demand in the county, and the red shows what we go from renewable. So the point is, what we are facing today is what the rest of the world is going to face in future as more and more renewables come in. So, two choices: put up with that, or work with it and improve. And in fact, with work that we've done over a number of years in Orkney, which has looked at what better ways to utilise the energy flows. And with the active network management system was set up. People in the audience are heavily involved in it, and a graph that Mark and Lee produced some time ago shows the change that's gone on in terms of electricity flows. 2008 at the top of the graph, 2018 at the bottom. Each dot is a day. The red means we were importing, green means we were exporting. And you can see the change that's gone on over time of us as more and more renewables have gone on, the flow of electricity out of the county has now started to dominate. In fact, we're in a position where we now produce around or greater than more electricity than we need every year. It's around 110, 120, 130% some years. And the point is that we were saying to a lot of people, with major stakeholders, that our today is what other people are going to face tomorrow. But it's not just electricity, it's wider than that. And indeed, we've done some work from over a number of years, which has really looked at how we can take our experience and try and help other people see what's coming. And to some extent, we came up with this idea, I think Gareth came up with the idea of there being like renewable snakes and ladders. And the thing is that sometimes things go right and sometimes things don't. And we've got a whole lot of opportunities that we really face, which we've seen as a result of our experience, and that we've got high levels of energy needed, we've got rich resources, and all the other things that are here. Supportive local authority, which is really, really powerful, and well, gratitude to all the council for the support that they do give. But we've also got very diverse energy situations. We have ferries, we have planes, you know, our transport is very different. But we've also got the challenges that we've got, the snakes in the whole process. And those really come down to inappropriate tariffs, charging processes which have been set up really for generating coal-based electricity in the past. The DNO, SSE are singly disengaged on a lot of areas which have been disappointing. And we need to really make sure that we're getting this right. And the point is, we need to be efficient where we actually show to me. Don't talk about this, we get on with it. Down.
So what you want to look at now is coming up from the local and maybe think about that wider strategic importance that Orkney may have. And that's going to be around offshore wind. These are typical of the style of turbines. These are the ones on the Kincardine field just off Stonehaven, but these are less than a half the size of the turbines that are going to be involved in our waters. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the distribution of what's called the ScotWind round. So this was a leasing round for acreage for offshore wind that took place a couple of years ago now, and there's going to be a presentation after this one about some of the details. But it's something that is happening, it's something that's essential for Scotland, Orkney and the UK's decarbonisation, and therefore it's probably worthwhile us being aware of that, thinking about the opportunities and challenges that are associated with it, and to use a word that James Stockton often uses, what is the contribution that Orkney can make to this development, and what can we expect, and how can we make that contribution best? So there's a little bit of maths going on here. So this is again a picture of that distribution of these opportunities. And if we click through the numbers, so we need, as the UK, about 150 gigawatts of new energy to provide electricity to transition the UK over the next 20 years. Most of that's going to come from around Scotland because we've got the sea space and we've got the wind. Those turbines are going to be 15 to 20 megawatt turbines, and each of those turbines is going to probably be 280 to 300 metres tall, which is the same length as one of the oil tankers that are in Scapa Flow, or the same height as the Shard building, which you may be familiar with in London. We need about 8,000 of those turbines to provide that 180 megawatts, and in the time that we've got from say 2025 to 45, we've got 7,000 days as a country. So basically each day we have to produce and sail out and install a 20 megawatt turbine to meet that need, and obviously every day you're not going to be able to do that. So we need to have a place where we can assemble and integrate these turbines, and go down with the weather windows we've got and the challenges seasonally, we need to be able to store those turbines, and that means that there might be at any time 20 to 24 turbines needed in a place which are coming in, going out and ready to go to sea. And the reality is that when you look around the coast of the UK, there is only one harbour that is big enough for that enterprise, and that is Scapa Flow, which we herald very often as the world's biggest natural harbour in the Northern Hemisphere. But even Scapa Flow won't do that with one facility. There's not a one solution here that takes that forward. So we need to think about how Scapa Flow could make a contribution, to use that word, to the endeavour of decarbonising the UK. And the more we think about that and the more we discuss it locally, hopefully the better that ultimate solution will become. So there's a number of ideas, and a number of them are outlined here at different stages of development. You may be familiar with the Deepdale Deepwater Quay that Orkney Harbours have been looking at for the last few years, and that's moving forward in different ways. In the middle is a presentational harbour presentation I made a couple of years ago at the Science Festival about what we call the Mega Offshore Wind Hub, and that's a floating solution, more in the middle of Scapa Flow, and it's slightly more flexible in that it could build up from a crane barge and then ultimately become a larger facility if there was demand for it. And there are also other places such as Galta and Lyoness that people are looking at as potential areas for development as well. So we have a plethora of options. So the first thing is, well, what does Scapa Flow look like if we put all that in there? Well, actually, this is the map of what Scapa Flow looks like with none of that in there yet. That's what it looks like at the moment. So Scapa Flow is a designated harbour. It's got ferries, it's got tugs, it's got an oil terminal, it's got anchorages, it's got fish farms, it's got a wave energy test site, and it's got areas where ports have been developed. So it's a pretty busy area. And the next map shows what that might look like if these other activities came into it. Now, these are not saying it has to go in these places, but it's just starting to say what kind of areas might be needed and applicable for this kind of development. So this shows where what they call wet storage might take place, where bases are put onto the seabed and stored before they're integrated into turbines. It shows where some of the jack-up barges may operate, and it shows still that the harbour can undertake its traditional activities as long as there are oil tankers coming to Orkney. And finally, one of the other questions that we're often asked, well, what would that look like laterally, if you like, not the bird's eye view, but the horizontal view? So this may be a little difficult on the screen, but I'm going to try it. So this is the view from the Ham Strait, as you go south from Kirkwall to Ham, looking out westwards to Hoy, as it is now. And
just stress what happens. In the system called wireframe, basically what you do is you draw a line on the prominent feature of basic horizons. You take all the colour out, take all the texture out, you just look at the edges. That's principally how this works. And so this is sort of called a wireframe diagram.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, and if we go to the next one, this shows what different development areas might look like from the Ham Strait with the size of turbines that we're talking about. So the green ones in the front are in the Deepdale area, the purple ones are on the Galta, the light blue ones are over towards the development area, the floating area, and then the green and the yellow are over towards Lyoness. So that's from one perspective. And if we change the angle a little bit and come to Scapa Bay and do the same thing, you see that by changing the angle, the relative importance of these different areas changes visually. And so we've got diagrams for oil, we've got diagrams for flotter, diagrams for Stromness, obviously. So not on here, but all of these things need to come into play. And obviously, from an impact point of view, these are things that we are going to see within the context of everything else we see in Scapa Flow. But the point being, they're not permanent, they are going to be going out to sea. They're not going to be nesting in Scapa Flow. Okay.
So the point is, people often talk about the industrialisation of the landscape, and in fact what we've got here are showing illustrations of temporary activity. It's a temporary, the way a tanker is temporarily afloat, in the way that an oil rig comes into maintenance work. But there will be a period, for a number of years, 10 years, 12 years, something like that, when there will be kits coming and going. To some extent it depends on the flow rate, how quickly we put these out and what happens. And also we've got choices as to where we do things, as to how impactful they will be. You will not see all of those turbines in those photographs at the same time. There will only be one or two of those sites or something, but it gives an indication. So I think we shouldn't be too worried about it, and we can work, we can understand what the impacts are going to do. The other thing that's also going on, other than the floating offshore wind, is the onshore wind side of things. Orkney has been an early adopter of various technologies, and there's a talk we're giving later on the Science Festival about the Costa Headwind turbine, I think it's on Monday, I think. And we've adopted other wind technologies over the years in various guises. And indeed we get some colleagues up from the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero from London in the last couple of days and showing them around. They're excited to see what's going on because we have an awful lot of domestic wind, and we went up to the Hammers Hill wind site as well. It would be great for them to get up close and personal with this stuff and realise that a lot of people here have actually got renewables. Right, quick audience participation. Hands up if you've got a wind turbine or a solar panel. Brilliant. Brilliant. Right, so the point is, Orkney has got 1/9 of the UK's domestic wind turbines. Okay? 756 turbines here in the county. We have been an early adopter of this technology, and we know that it works. And the other thing that's coming along, the proposals the council has put forward, and indeed there are other schemes around, because the 55 megawatts of wind that we've got at the moment provides most of our electrical demand, but in a minute we're about to put further turbines up, which will lead to the transmission link, which we've started to mobilise at the moment. There's a surveyor next to my house today looking at where they're going to build a substation. And the turbines that are shown here are the ones for the council's projects. So we are going to see more and more coming into the landscape. But it's not just wind. There's the other side of things. We're working with marine energy, so wave energy at the bottom, tidal energy at the top. And the point is, that's not graphics, that's not CGI, these are all machines which are present in one in the bottom left-hand corners, in Garson at the moment, awaiting possible redeployment. One on the right, in motion, is out east of Orkney at the moment. They've just announced they're going to build a bigger set of machines, and 250 kilowatt machines due to come to our site in a few years. Magellan's for the Eday is actually in Scapa Flow at the moment, having some maintenance done, and the orbital tidal turbine in the top left-hand corner is within a sound machine to go back out to before all that. But these are just individual machines. There are plans for multiple machines to go out and start to build this up from singles to multiples to groups to clusters and onwards. So we are seeing the start of something that's going to be evolving in our marine space as well. And Orkney's been very good at adopting that. We did some work a little while ago showing the value of doing this R&D activities. It's been about £40 million has come to EMEC over the years, but we've shown a £370 million gross value added to the UK economy, of which £260 million seen the flow to Scotland, of which £130 million flow to Orkney. So the point is, doing this R&D stuff is working, we're making this work, and that's why our colleagues from London for us to see exactly the realities of our work, and hope that they can put in better legislative provisions to help drive this forward. If we want to move this forward, they don't know how to do it. We need to help them explain that. So that's all. So Gareth with offshore wind, we've got onshore wind with the marine energy, and the other one that's often is an interesting one, and that's a particular thought that Gareth has been working with, has been floating solar. Now, top left-hand corner floating solar, 10 kilowatts in the Maldives in 2015. Bottom left, at the top right, Singapore, up to a megawatt in 2019. Bottom left, 2022, Taiwan, at 180 megawatts. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a blue box and a red box. And the red box is basically how much floating solar you need to power Japan. The blue box is how much floating solar you need to power China. So the point is that there are technologies that are moving on, and Gareth kindly pointed out, all need not be left behind, because since about the 1990s we have had solar power, lots of been floating. We're on the NLB boys and the Harvard boys around the harbour. They're not quite the scale of China yet, that's what so there's those, and the other piece I just want to also talk about is what's been going on with hydrogen. So hydrogen's very much a developing story. You've seen this graphic presented a couple of times in previous science festivals. And it shows sort of the ecosystem that we were starting to build up based around starting to use hydrogen on Eday from spare tidal energy, which we couldn't otherwise get out of the grid because the grid was too small. And we started to look at things, we've been carting hydrogen down and using it in fuel cells on occasions in Kirkwall Pier to actually supply the ferries and trying to get it on ferries, a whole load of stuff. And we also did some work done on the other Chaplaincy, putting in a 1 megawatt electrolyser. And then looking for a boiler, or putting the boiler in the school. But actually, I think it's a developing story, because what we're actually seeing is we decided not to put the heating onto Eday, into property. The electrolyser on Chaplaincy has been removed because there were constraint problems. So there were problems in making it work in a constrained wind environment, and I think the boiler is going to be decommissioned at the school. And also, we've been doing work with, say, things like electric vehicles which have got fuel cells in them, which is working in Kirkwall, and also putting hydrogen into to fueling ferries, and carrying the hydrogen around. We're actually seeing there are some better things to do with the hydrogen, and that's the bit I want to talk to you about this developing story. So we've seen in the time we've been doing this that electric vehicles have got so much better. Electric vehicles now do, frankly, everything you need a vehicle to do. So we're not really seeing much market for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We think that's probably gone past. And indeed, the shipping side of things, we think there are some challenges with handling and volume, and we now start to think differently. And this really has been brought about by some pioneering work that we've done on e-fuels, so fuels made through electrolysis. And it was done by a chap called Pete Oswald, and this photograph's going to come at the end, really annoying. So I'm going to the end of this, so it's going to be there. So that's Pete. Pete Oswald from South Romsey did some really pioneering work. I'm sorry to say he died about a month ago. But his company, IGTL, came to us and wanted to work with hydrogen. And we were able to provide them with hydrogen during lockdown, and they installed a fuel synthesis plant in Billy Creek. And from the hydrogen that we make from water and bringing carbon monoxide in, they combined the two and actually made synthetic fuel, which was then used by the RAF in their first ever fully synthetically fueled flight. That was made from Orkney hydrogen, I'm pleased to say. Unfortunately, carbon monoxide came from outside, but we're working on the next bit, which is how do we get the carbon out of the atmosphere to actually do this again. So there is a big change coming on. Why are we thinking about gasoline? Why are we thinking about kerosene? And the reason for this is, it's a bit of chemistry. I'm going to take you through a bit of sciencey festival, a bit of chemistry, which was brought to me by sort of chaps from the crowd for DMV, who did some work on looking at future fuels. Because the point is that we live in a particular period when we've got an amazing fuel called diesel. And if you plot diesel by weight or density, trust me, you'll see where this is going. You can look at different fuels as whether they're heavier or lighter and easy to store or more difficult to store. And basically, if you put diesel in the graph, top right-hand corner are fuels that require less space and are lighter than diesel, so easy to carry around, require they're more dense. Bottom right-hand corner require more space, but they're lighter than diesel. And then bottom left-hand corner, they're heavier and require more space, and the top one is that requires less space but heavier. Right, so those are the parameters. If we look and see what happens if we look at all the various fuels that we currently basically have, the top blob says liquids, they're hydrocarbon, hydrogen-based, liquefied gases, natural gases and solids, and we plot all our fuels on that graph. what you find is that diesel is there and there's nothing really near it. Synthetic petrol, synthetic diesel, biodiesel, they're all very good at cluster. But the rest of the stuff is not even. And hydrogen, as we often say, very, very light, but you have to hold it, you have to contain it. By the time you then put the containment systems on the correct fuel, the weights of the containment move things generally to the left and down. Okay. The conclusion of that line is there's nothing to the right and above diesel. Okay? And similarly, if you look at it, there's practically nothing that's even half of it. The question is, how do you do diesel without damaging the climate? And that's the technology that Big Oval brought us. That's the technology that allows us to make synthetic, we make synthetic gasoline, we make synthetic gas stove. But now to make actually synthetic kerosenes as well. So we think there is going to be a role for synthetic kerosenes. So we are still using hydrogen, but we're going to stick it quite quickly to a carbon molecule. And it makes it more portable. Because frankly, we've had hydrogen cylinders for years, it's quite hard to carry, but carrying diesel around, we carry it in a bucket. You know, and the ease and the portability of it, but it's got to be carbon free. And the big opportunity we really do have is that we think this is going to be a big opportunity to export all these energy in a big way because we've got this thing. The flotter oil terminal, and this graphic shows the intentions to convert it to a hydrogen hub, the electrolysis run on the side. But actually, personally, I wonder whether it's actually going to be a need for its hub. But watch this space, we'll see this go. Gareth.
Thank you, Neil. So, this story is building many layers, and bringing it back to us as the citizens of Orkney. One of the other things that we need to do and think about is, I mean, to see the hands going up and the amount of utilisation of renewables in here makes Neil and I feel very proud of our community that we live in and the efforts that we all make to make a difference. But we have this energy system that we're working within, and that system sometimes knocks us back and we have to come back for more and ask for different things. So we just thought we would touch on where we think we are with our integrated energy system. And all of you that are in Orkney will be aware that over the last 4 years through COVID, we had a project that about 50 people in Orkney were engaged in delivering, and another 900 of us have become members of, and that's ReFLEX. And this is really a test of a system to jump ahead of where everybody else is and to provide an integrated pathway to an energy future. And we found some great successes in that, but we also found a number of the challenges that we've talked about in the presentation. But when you find a challenge, you can't just give up and go away, you have to stay there and fight and make that better. And that's what ReFLEX is still doing, and the team are endeavouring to make and fix all the blockages and the challenges that we found. And so, step by step, as you know, we were most successful with cars. We're now getting chargers starting to be rolled out, particularly for businesses. But month by month and year by year, we want to grow that service. And there's others in Thor, in Community Energy Scotland, in Warmworks and the other services that are delivering under, in a different way, under that umbrella of trying to change the energy system. And one of the findings that we found through ReFLEX was an economic conundrum. And here I'd like to pay tribute to Howie, because basically the answer to this, I feel, is about creating an energy bank. And many years ago, Howie, I think, tested all of our minds to the idea of an energy bank. But that's what science is all about. It's about putting ideas out there. They may not be immediately picked up, but they may be valuable in the future. And what this slide shows is two possible futures. So the top is, if you like, business as usual. And if you just look at the black arrow, what it's showing is that our costs continue going forward from 2023 to 2050. They get bigger. And we've just seen in the last few years how our energy costs have virtually doubled because of the pressures on the gas price, which ironically didn't affect any of the energy we were using for electricity, but we still had to pay the difference. The bottom is showing an alternative view of what could happen if we transformed in the next 7 years to a renewables future. We could have a higher bubble, if you like, of capital spend, but then we get a huge dividend because we decouple ourselves from that future hydrocarbon market, and we become in control of our own energy future. Now, anybody that's got a financial background might start to see that what you need is to effectively have loans or a mortgage for that bubble to occur, because we can't afford it as citizens to put all of that money in as capital, and to make the transition just, we need to be able to redistribute the accessibility to that fund as well. So what we feel we need is an energy investment bank which is there to provide the capital to allow us to adopt technology earlier than we would otherwise do, and then you pay that back over time as you would your mortgage. So it's an idea, it's a foundation that was built upon a germ that was set a while ago, but we really need to sit down and think not only how do we technologically deliver our transition, but how do we economically deliver our transition as well. So let's go back then and start to build this up to some kind of conclusion. So how do we take all of this stuff and make it work for us all in practice? So one of the things that we often get asked is, how does Orkney do all this stuff? How does Orkney manage to continually innovate and be ahead of the game in so many areas? And one of the conclusions that I certainly come to is that not by planning, but almost by good judgment perhaps, and it's that idea of nurturing and building on what you have, which is a very good farming tradition. We've created a structure inadvertently in our community which allows us to innovate, which means that we acknowledge and we celebrate the people that create vision and have strategy, but they're not all in one place. They could be anywhere within our community. We have key organisational structures that we all participate in and keep alive that allow us to function as a community still in a time when many communities don't have that capacity. We then have the participation of people, the levels of participation in Orkney in every regard always come out ahead of everywhere else, and it's perhaps because there's a structure and a demand for that participation. And we don't just participate, we act, and that involves the support. And the hands going up is your support for the renewables revolution that's going on in Orkney. So that community-wide structure that nobody planned to be there, but it's just something that we've got, allows us to go forward in the future. And just to point out that we're here today talking about energy, but you know, energy is not Orkney, and Orkney isn't just energy. Orkney's all of these other different things, and it excels in all of these other different areas. And I'm sure many of you are involved in some of these other activities as well. But what all of these things do is they strive to be world class. We don't accept the average or mediocre. We try and do things to the best of our capacity, which to me is a really Orcadian thing. So the concept of a living laboratory around all of these topics is something that we can aspire to be proud of and deliver. Now that message isn't something that we've just talked about ourselves. There's been occasions where politicians, Neil said, we had one yesterday, we have a stream of them that come up from south to visit. And a few years ago, a very famous one came up, and we had to think about what would be a message that you would give to somebody who was at that time leading the country. And there were three things that came out of that, or there's two lots of three things. So the first look was what could we focus on as areas where we could make a contribution, and the three, energy, transport and digital enterprise, were three that we focused on. The other three are in that second bottom line, which is what we need as a community to thrive, is we need recognition that we've got a special contribution to make. We need a mandate to be able to deliver it, and then we need the flexibility to enact that mandate. And so none of those three things involve money, but they really involve us being given the freedom to fulfill our potential, to make the contribution that Orkney can make. And we've used this a number of times since, and it's become quite a mantra, both internally, because I think there's things in Orkney where recognising what we've got, giving ourselves within our community the mandate to enact it, and then giving ourselves the structural flexibility to deliver is absolutely key to our future success. Now, money is at the root of all evil, but also at the root of all solutions. And we've talked about the idea of an energy bank. Now, banks don't have the best MO in the world at the moment. But again, not all banks are the same, and our bank, the Orkney Bank, could be created in our vision. And there's a thing called impact investing. And impact investing is where you balance the financial return with the actual impact that you have from investing that money. So you don't just put the money into the highest rate of return, you put the money into the thing that gives you best value as a whole. And you may take a slightly lower rate of return, but you get that added value. So the principles of impact investment are something that I think sits very well in Orkney, and it's something that our energy bank could aspire to look at. And the scale of it is that bubble that I showed you, it costs about £3 billion to invest in the energy infrastructure that we need for effecting the transition. The cost of business as usual in Orkney at the moment would be somewhere between £3 and £5 billion if we run it over 20 years. So we would save £2 billion possibly in our energy future if we adopted this approach. So how do we organise ourselves to do something like that? Having actually, this is probably how this works. You talked, Harry, about the scale of the endeavours that Orkney's undertaken, and in different eras, looking back really from the first settlers who went under an incredible journey to actually get here, Orkney has managed to achieve things that many others would have shied away from. My belief is that the climate change challenge is the greatest challenge that we face as a community to date. Its breadth across everybody that's in our community, the impact that it can have on our society and on our environment is far greater than Hudson Bay, fishing, oil and gas and all of these other things. And what was interesting, if we look at change, is COVID, and think about how as a community we changed when we came together to tackle COVID. And that was a short-term 2-year problem that we kind of got through. Climate change is far bigger than COVID. And what are we doing? Have we mobilised 100 people to tackle it? Have we taken people from one part of our society and redeployed them in another part? Have we created the financial mechanisms to allow these things to happen? We haven't. A lot of these things are just staying business as usual at the moment. So if we want to change, and actually it's not a question of whether we want to, we're going to have to change because the world is going to change for us. It's a question of how we respond to that. So we know that we can do it. We can speak about it, as we do here. Now what we've got to do is just go on and do it.
So this is basically a call to arms. We really, really need to take this seriously. Because if we don't fix this, who's going to fix us? Above the door at EMEC, which I quote, which was from Dyke. The quote reads, "The problems of the world cannot possibly be solved by the cynics and critics, illusions and limited by obvious realities. We need people who can dream of things that never work, and ask why not." And I have to say, that's exactly what Orkney Science Festival does. So, with that, we're happy to take questions on what is in says at now. I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention. I'd like to find some way in which we can all commit to go do just one thing that's going to be slightly different than what we've been here today, because if we don't, we're going to have a very different festival in the future. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'll happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our fantastic speakers. That was incredibly interesting and detailed around the workshop, and I know we've got quite a few fantastic questions on Slido, so if anyone else wants to submit any questions, or if there's any questions in the room, you have a microphone, and if you just want to raise your hands and we'll get it over to you. Any questions on Davidson? Yes. Whoops, Mr. Record. But I think kind of you started and finished on the political points there, and had quite key questions around, how can we put pressure on politicians? It's become so polarised and full in societies and almost politically weaponised, this right versus left versus climate change doesn't exist versus everything else. So how can we actually influence that change? But also, what lessons can we try and push from Orkney to try and help the rest of the country and the rest of the world? And how have you managed to convince our Canadians to embrace renewables so much better than the rest of us?
I would argue we haven't. We haven't convinced people. People convince themselves. It's hard economics. But all used to be bloody weak, and the sun comes out. So I think that was mutual recognition. So I wouldn't claim any particular piece there. In terms of how we deal with politicians, somebody once pointed out to me that we don't have elected leaders. What we have is elected followers. They just follow from in front. And the point is that people are elected to stand in front of the group. If the group chooses to shuffle sideways and go in a slightly different direction, the leader has a choice. Stay where you are and irrelevant, or stand in front of the new position. So I think it's up to us to articulate what we think we need. I also think it's quite important that we can make the most of the positive attitude we've got here. Because routinely, I find people, when you encounter a problem, they lean into it and suggest a piece of the solution to go along with it. It's not like, says, well, that's interesting, have you thought about this? Can you try that? So I genuinely think that maintaining that positivity in the face of some pretty dire consequences is really, really important. And when we had Fritz Williams and Catherine up, and they'd gone onto the tidal turbine, this was 18 months or so ago, one of the big pieces that came out of those conversations there was that they're really looking for places and people who are actually trying to make a difference, to inspire others to take steps. And I think that's our role. Do it, show it works, and then critics can go hang themselves, because I think we know it works.
Yeah, and just to kind of add another layer on that, you said it, Neil, is about the elected followers. And I would say that, we entertain and inform, like the BBC is there, entertain and inform visitors that come up to Orkney about what's going on as official visitors. But of course, there's the hundreds of thousands of unofficial visitors that come to Orkney. And I think that's actually one of the greatest influences that all of us have had. And we know there's apocryphal tales about, as soon as you land, well, even at the other end of Orkney, you get into a conversation in Edinburgh or Aberdeen with the people that are coming on the plane or on the ferry, might get onto a bus or onto a taxi and get engaged in a conversation. And if you let out that you're interested in energy, that taxi driver, the bus driver will start at you from that point. So it's not just, as Neil said, it's not just us, the professionals, it's all of us as a community that communicate about our energy transition to everybody else. And I think that's the greatest influence we have. Orkney's name, literally around the world, as an energy transition place, is incredible. The reach that we have. So that's the real power that we have, is to continually talk to populations, not just the politicians.
On your last point, somebody's asked if we really think that tidal generation will get the same scale as offshore wind, and if not, why?
No, it won't, because there aren't as many places where there are strong tides as there are big winds, and also tidal is limited by physical geography. You can have a wind turbine infinite height, basically. It's just a material science problem. You can't have a turbine of infinite depth. You bank on the seabed. So there are some physical limits. However, one of the advantages of tidal energy is that it is not driven by the same forces as wind. The wind is pretty much old solar energy, warmed up the sky. We create wind, blew across the water. Tidal, on the other hand, is a position of the sun and the earth. And so it's driven by better forces, so it works at night, it's very predictable. So we see it as a piece of the integrated system as a whole, rather than becoming something that's going to supplant. However, there are other pieces as well, which is we're going to be doing offshore wind, that's coming. And the facilities that are needed to do offshore wind can then often be remobilised to then do tidal. So there are definite advantages in tidal following along.
More questions, go on, straight, and get through as many as you can.
Yeah, if this is spurring any questions in the room, just put your hand up and
On the trial,
comes on its way. Somebody's asked, if we're building so many gigawatts of turbines offshore beside Orkney, is there any point really adding a 2 small megawatts onshore?
So, turbines can be considered inanimate energy machines. but they also are profit-making machines. And so one of the key things is who owns the turbines and where does that margin on the supply of energy go to? So Orkney's very fortunate actually, because this is ironic, but because of all the problems we've had with regulations over the years, a lot of outsiders have just said, look, Orkney's not a place to come and invest in for wind. It's fallen to Orcadians to do that, and we've benefited from that. The offshore wind movement kind of caught us on the hop, I think, as a community. It might have been much more sensible if every application that had gone in had an Orkney PLC part to it, and we'd been co-owners of these developments instead of just stakeholders. And that's a choice we've got to make for the future rounds, because there will be future rounds. So the difference between onshore is that it can still be owned locally. Offshore at the moment, the ones that are in play, unless we negotiate a deal, which again is something we could do, to say that the community's interested in becoming a co-owner. So I think that's one of the key differences.
Currently, the wave energy comes from the vertical movement of the waves. Can the wave energy also be obtained from horizontal movements of the waves? And what would the difference be in efficiency, I wonder?
So yes, you're right, the movement of the waves is horizontal as well as vertical. Basically the water particles move in a circle, so that when you get close to the shore you end up with a surge effect. In fact, we've had a couple of machines in the sea after the crew that made the most of exactly that process. Like a big laptop stuck on the seabed, and as the waves came, it went like that, and it worked against the base. There are horses for courses really. There are different places where those would work. They only work with called terminators, because they're pretty much close to the cliff. You don't take the energy out, it's going to stop against the cliff. But they don't necessarily work in deep water, because it's necessary about motion. So, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. See me outside, we'll not get tired about that. Sorry, there I thought. About the question about where can energy be made be cheaper in Orkney if we're making it. And this is a point that some of this presentation was actually given to Ofgem. Gareth and I gave a presentation, and me and other people online battering away at Ofgem, because the rules for our electricity market were written for a period of deal. There are changes going on. Ofgem are trying to get with the program to fit. And so there needs to be a different way of working, because it is iniquitous that we have energy that's generated here that we can't easily use, and that's a good one. Unfortunately, it's a bunch of markets at the moment. We are battering away at Henry at the moment. It's not clear. It is too damn hard, and it should be.
It's a fantastically worded question, whoever has this one. We are currently trying to solve 21st century problems with 20th century legislation. Are there any signs that our elected followers are running to catch up? And there's another question which ties in as well. Are there what's called tensions between the imperatives of Orkney versus Edinburgh versus the Westminster?
I'll do that one. So there are some signs. I mean, obviously we have a party political system, and not all of the parties have the same policies. So as they get closer to the election in Westminster, I think we'll see differentiation. As we all know from the press that we've read, maybe that differentiation that we thought was going to come 6 months ago isn't quite as wide now because of what happened in Richmond, for example. And the irony that, you know, a car management scheme in Richmond can have a profound effect on the energy strategy for the country is bizarre. But maybe that goes to the second question about, you know, how does a place like Orkney relate to the other levels of government? And effectively we have to be as relevant as Richmond was to the discussion. And that doesn't mean in any way that we invite Boris to come and have a role in our community at all. I'm not advocating that. But we need to think smartly about how we can be relevant to the discussion and use our influence and the proof of what's possible to shift the dial. And I think we are doing that, and there are signs of that happening. And there's another member of the audience who I know has a direct line into a totally different party and has been feeding in information based on what he's experienced to that other party. And indeed, we might therefore see the consequences of that coming out in policy. So we're seeing people engage in the Orkney story and take it back and help use that for policy advancement. You know, it's not all good news. You know, as we all know, there's been some horrendous things that have gone on. So we're not just feeding back, you know, sweets and chocolates. We're sending back some other study stuff as well at times. But it helps steer things in the right direction.
Yes. Sorry, Tom.
The idea of synthetic fuel generation at Flodder is very attractive, where we extract carbon from the air, probably as CO2, and use hydrogen that's been generated from renewables. I worry about the overall energy balance there. I'm assuming that you need to have an awful lot more energy in than you'll get out of the diesel that you make when you can.
Yeah, you do need a lot of energy, but one of the advantages of renewables is we're in a position where we're going to have a lot of energy. But actually, it's not just a purely efficiency-based question, it's an effectiveness-based question. So if we are going to continue to fly, in my opinion, you're only going to do that with liquid hydrocarbon. So the question is, are you going to continue to fly? So if you're going to fly, you've got two choices. We've got a choice. You either make a fuel before you go, or you just burn the same or something that we call a promise you plant some trees. I worry that the promise aspect is open to cheating, frankly. Whereas the opportunity to capture a carbon first and instead of make the field and then fly is actually more defendable. It is interesting, however, that some of the activities, such as the carbon capture process, although that is really energy, it takes a lot of energy, but actually look into it in detail. Things like the process they use in Kleinbergs in Iceland, the sorbent that they stick with CO2 to, you have to then crack the CO2 back off. You have to heat it to 100 degrees centigrade. Well, I've got waste heat coming out of my electrolyzer at any time. So we think there are some synergies to be brought to bear, which is using the waste heat from other processes to drive some of these along. So we think there's scope here. So we're pushing this, and we've got some proposals in development at the moment to try and do that small facilities trial, to try and break the way through and find out what works. And if it does turn out to be completely bonkers, we'll stop at this scale and then return, yeah. But let's find out. Let's get in there and find out. A question.
We've got time for one more.
Are there lots in the coffee?
Just down one here.
Hi. Is there any desire within the community to own the energy generation directly to replace SSC?
Okay, hands up.
Hands up. If you think that we should take greater ownership of our energy system, including maybe the wires and generations, yeah, put your hands up now.
That's probably about half.
So it's obviously a really big challenge, but you know, the other thing is that we're faced with big challenges in the business as usual situation. I think, you know, personally, the fact that our electricity prices went up by 100%, you know, and yet demonstrably the cost of our energy didn't change at all in Orkney, is one of the, you know, that cost Orkney about £15 million last year. It cost us £15 million in electricity. You know, that's a great injustice. And people say, how do we make that happen? We have to take control of it.
Well, I've got a slightly contrary view to part of that, and that is that society works best when you play to your strengths and you work together. And I do worry that if we just declare the eye of just pull the wires up, that will get really expensive because of the reliability, and we do benefit from the reliability of the network. So, however, I completely agree that the iniquity of what's been going on is wrong. I mean, the fact that, with all the stuff we've done, Martin's kicked off, you show aggressively, the fact that we're used to, that we've done all this work, and we haven't even seen the chair or the chief executive of SFC up here, I think is interesting. Martin, go on, I can't let you turn off that. Quickly.
We are in Orkney.
Martin.
Okay.
We in Orkney have benefited hugely since 1947 or 48, when all the electricity was nationalised with common tariff throughout the whole of the hydroelectric area. And if it hadn't have been for a few politicians and the members of the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board who fought hard for it, Orkney and other island groups would have finished up paying a far larger price for its electricity since that time. Right up until today, to be honest, we still get subsidised. National Grid put a levy on every electricity customer in the UK to fund the electricity network in the hydroelectric area to a tune of about £70 million a year. We're still getting that subsidy. We have to be careful that we don't shout for looking at one thing, because we could lose the other.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for all of you for coming and for your fantastic questions. We know there are more, but the gentlemen have agreed to discuss further out in the cafe if anyone has any further questions or arguments they want to bring to the table. But thank you so much again.
Can we do a picture of us here with the audience in the background? This is a better picture of the screen.
Everyone up for a photo? Any objections? Thank you, Grace.
Back out. Thank you.